Hello, today is Friday, December 8th, 2023. I am Hanson Sue, here with Lucy Suchman. So Lucy, could you start by introducing yourself and sort of your title position or, maybe your relationship to AI?
Sure. I'm Lucy Suchman. I'm a professor emerita of the Anthropology of Science and Technology at Lancaster University in the UK. And I have a very long-standing, I would say, critical engagement with AI, going back to the late 1970s, early 1980s, when I began as a PhD student at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. And my current work is at the intersection of anthropology and also the interdisciplinary field of science and technology studies, or STS.
Thank you. So could you talk about how you first got into becoming a critic or a commentator on AI?
Sure. So I arrived at Xerox PARC in 1979 and was there as I initially was a research intern, and then I ended up working at Xerox PARC for 20 years, basically from 1980 to 2000. And during that time, of course, the field of AI was when I first encountered it in the 80s. It was very much the knowledge-based or expert systems approach. And I was in a group called Cognitive and Instructional Sciences at PARC. And I came to PARC. I was doing a PhD in anthropology at UC Berkeley. And I came with a very strong interest in an interactionist approach, basically, to understanding our everyday co-production of the social world. And so on arriving at PARC, I was really struck by the idea of interactive machines. This was the beginnings of, well, obviously, we'd had ELIZA since the 60s, but this was a moment when expert systems were coming into being, and also interactive interfaces. And obviously at PARC, that was a major focus. So I became interested in the question of what it would mean to take seriously the idea that we're interacting with machines, and in particular to bring some of the insights that were being developed at the time in what was called conversation analysis in sociology. So very close studies of the moment by moment co-construction of mutual intelligibility that we do in our conversations with each other. And my colleagues, meanwhile, had the idea of Richard Fikes, Austin Henderson, the idea of developing an expert system that would be a coach for people in the use of a particularly gnarly photocopier that Xerox had just put out on the market. And so I ended up doing a very close study of people's attempts to use this machine with the assistance of this expert system. And from that, and this was an expert system based very much on the planning model that was dominant at the time. And the assumption there was that the way that we understand each other is that we recognize each other's goals and plans, and that then illuminates the meaning of what we're doing and saying. So it's a kind of an exchange of plans and actions. And so my analysis of people's engagements with this expert system in relation to this big machine that they were trying to operate looked at the relative resources that were available. And I did this really by, I had videotapes of people attempting to make sense out of the expert system and the machine that it was describing for them. And so I transcribed these videotapes and basically kind of took myself as a for this purpose, a kind of fully fledged intelligent observer of the interaction. And I realized that there was an enormous amount that was available to me as an observer to make sense out of what the person was trying to do, or the persons, because I used the device of having two people, both of whom were unfamiliar with this machine, try to work it out together. And I should say that this whole sort of experiment was being done at Xerox PARC. So my research subjects were people from PARC, including some very prominent computer scientists. Famously, Alan Newell was one of my research subjects. Ron Kaplan, very wonderful computational linguist. And so I became interested in what it was that I had access to that helped me understand what was going on in these interactions, including sort of the places where they broke down, and I could see that there was a lack of communication between the people and the expert system. And I realized that there was an enormous amount that was available to me, what people were saying, and a lot of things that they were doing that weren't available to the machine because they didn't change its state. So I realized that the machine was engaging in this interaction as if through this tiny, tiny pinhole that was just that subset of the things that the people involved were doing that actually changed its state. And so I developed a kind of transcription system so I could see that. And it really helped me see where things kind of went off the rails, where the communication broke down, how from the logics, within the logics of the system, a state change happening in a particular moment, in a particular context, as people were attempting to make their copies with this big photocopier, how that was being read by the machine according to the sort of inbuilt logics of the machine, and how I could see, watching what they were doing, that they were actually trying to do something quite different. And so that was a real revelation to me, and it's kind of became the basis of an argument which I think still holds about the tremendous asymmetry, let's say differences and asymmetries in the way that machines have access to our worlds, and the way that we, as humans, not only have access to those worlds, but are sort of actively involved in making those worlds as we go along.
Thank you. And did that work? Was that work the lead to your book? And
Yes.
maybe could you talk about the impact of that on the field?
Sure. Yes.
Or various fields?
Yeah. So out of that, as I said, I was a PhD student at the time. And so I ended up doing a dissertation that was really looking at the idea of interactive machines, the prevailing models in AI of cognition at the time. And my dissertation, which was titled Plans and Situated Actions, the Problem of Human-Machine Communication, was then published by Cambridge. And got a lot of circulation in computer science, in HCI. I think the fact that I was at PARC really helped that, because I was part of those networks. But it was received really well. And I tried very hard in the book and in my interactions with my colleagues at PARC to have my critique be generative. So it was very much about reframing problems. And the subtitle of the book, The Problem of Human-Machine Communication, was meant to convey how hard this problem is. The idea of reproducing the communicative or interactive or conversational competencies that are absolutely ingrained in us from the moment we're born, at least from the moment we're born. The idea of trying to recreate those capacities in a computationally based machine. My approach was to try to articulate how hard that problem was and why it was hard. And even though I would say, even though the approaches now to the design of conversational machines, chatbots, have changed tremendously, and we could talk more about that, that basic problem of the difference between our access to relevant worlds and the computational machine access to relevant worlds. I would say that that still holds. That's still at the core of the problem.
Thank you. It sounds like there's like a phenomenological aspect to that argument. Is that correct?
Yes, there certainly is a phenomenological aspect. Hubert Dreyfus was on my thesis committee. I was very influenced by his book, What Computers Can't Do, where he emphasized the extent to which our intelligence is based in our embodied, enacted, lived experience in the world. And then I would say, in addition to that, I brought this strong orientation to the sociality of our ways of knowing, of our co-production of knowledge, which came from anthropology, sociology. So yes, and also I was very strongly influenced by the subfield within sociology of ethnomethodology and conversation analysis. Those were a big part of what informed my own work.
Okay. So how have your views on AI evolved since then? And both from the change in your own career trajectory, but also changes in the field of AI itself.
Sure. Yeah, I've been following, so we're now talking 40 years or so. I've been following developments in AI throughout that time, really interested in what changes, what stays the same. And when I left Park in 2000, I went to Lancaster University, where there's a very strong program in science and technology studies that really was a continuation from my own studies in anthropology, but it kind of gave me an opportunity to expand my critical engagement. And so as I've followed developments, I've seen, of course, we've all seen this really quite radical change, the move away from expert systems, from logic-based, rule-based systems toward data-driven systems, computationally, statistically data-driven systems, which in many ways is a very radical change. But I'm also really struck that I really haven't seen things get any closer to the solution to this problem of human-machine communication that I set out. I think that contemporary chatbots suffer from the same limitations as the expert system that I was looking at in the 1980s. And that really has access, I think of it now in terms of, we could say, closed and open worlds, that when we think about context in the context of in relation to computational systems, we're talking about relevant aspects of the wider system of which the operation that's running is part. So if we think about large language models, they have their worlds are contained. Now they're being scaled to the point that they're contained within very, very, very large data sets. And they're billions of parameters, as we know, enormous amounts of compute power. But still, the frame of reference for a large language model, the context for any utterance that it has access to, is comprised by those data sets. And as we know, chatbots have zero knowledge or understanding of any of the reference of the tokens, the words translated as tokens that they're manipulating. For us, words are absolutely integrally tied to their reference in the world, to their consequences for the activities that we're collectively engaged with, and for for large language models and chatbots, of course, their world is made up of tokens. And that is a radical difference, and I think a difference that really matters. And so for us, the openness of the world, there's a wonderful feminist STS scholar, Karen Barad, and she says, we're not outside the world, but we're also not inside the world. We are, as she says, part of the world's becoming. So we are involved in the dynamic co-production of the worlds that we inhabit together. And that is a kind of, that is a form of emergent sense making and meaning making that comes from, very deep inside the kinds of animals that we are, as we have become what we are now over a very, very, very long time. And computational systems, while they have become fantastically sophisticated and versatile, they really are confined. And I don't think this is bad. I think it's just a fact that they are confined to the computationally tractable worlds that comprise the models, the data sets, the models through which they operate. So those do and continue to define the limits of their interactivity.
Great, thank you. We're going to move into the next section of the interview, which are going to be a set of questions for what we call our trust theater. So the first question is, what excites you most about chatbots and this technology moving into the future?
Yeah, I have been trying to get excited about chatbots, and I say that because I try to keep an open mind. Right, I'm deeply skeptical about claims for very skeptical of any claims for conversational ability on the part of computational machines, and I bring that skepticism to chatbots, and I'm overwhelmingly concerned about the ways in which they amplify the mystification of the idea of conversational agents. But I can see that if we think about chatbots not as conversational partners, actually, and in that respect, the chatbot is an unfortunate name, but rather if we think about them as new kinds of interfaces, and in particular, interfaces that can give access to, again, a closed world, which might be a very large closed world of data. And if we really understand that world of data, where does it come from? What are the social relations that it reflects? How was it produced? What's the labor that's involved in its production? What are the costs involved in its production? If we understand all those things, and we really understand the data sets, and we validate them, then chatbots, or the interfaces that go under the name of chatbots, I think can provide good forms of access to summarization of the contents of data sets. We know that prompt engineering is becoming a whole field in its own right, and clearly, the more we understand, really, prompt engineering is about coming to understand the capacities and the limits of these systems. So I can see an arena of application that could be very valuable, but in order to be valuable, I think it requires a lot more caution and caveats, and much more attention to the sources of data, and much more sort of deliberate attention to the consequences of what's contained in a given data set for the kinds of output that a chat-based interface is going to provide.
Thank you. What do you see as the greatest potential of chatbots to benefit humanity?
I have to say I'm not terribly excited about them. I think their potential value and range of application is enormously exaggerated, and I think that uh, there's a lot of critical literacy needed in order to define the appropriate domains of application.
What do you see as their greatest potential harm?
Well, I guess my leading concern about chatbots is a further mystification and a further invitation to translate um, computational systems into some kind of intelligent, sentient, interactive co-participants in our world. And so I think, and we already know all of the problems that arise from the apparent coherence that is generated through basically complete, this very, very elaborated, very sophisticated form of auto completion. And so we know the kind of false appearance of coherence that can be created. I have a lot of trouble with the term hallucination because I think it underrepresents what's involved in hallucination as a human experience. It's not really hallucination at all. It's not even really producing incorrect or erroneous answers. It's just a continuation of the kind of statistical prediction of what's going to come next that drives large language models. And so I'm basically concerned about any ways of articulating what's going on in our relations with computational systems that mystify rather than clarify what's going on the system side and the differences between that and how we ourselves make sense of the world, come to know things, engage in know things provisionally, and then engage in further investigation, debate and deliberate things. All of those aspects of knowing that are crucial to what it means to know as a human are really absent from large language models and chatbots as interfaces to them. And so that I think contributes to the harms. And then, of course, there are the intentional misuses of these systems to generate misinformation and so forth, which we also are becoming increasingly aware of.
Thank you. Why are some people talking about apocalypse and human extinction in connection to chatbots and AI, while others are talking about a kind of utopia in our future?
I think that both the utopian and the apocalyptic discourses around AI are promotional, basically. Whether it's singing the praises of AI and its potential to transform the world for good, to solve the climate crisis, to solve world hunger, etc., or it's the apocalyptic existential crisis. Both sides are reasserting the power of these technologies in ways that I think are highly misleading. And so I see those both as part of the same project, even though they appear to be in opposition to each other. And I think what we need instead, and I'm not alone in calling for this, there are many critical voices calling for attention to both the actual problems that we see emerging with large language models, with automated decision systems, the forms of profiling, stereotyping, discriminatory effects of those systems. So recognizing those real harms, and then also recognizing that the real existential crises that we face, while these technologies have an important part in them, not least in terms of the costs of their operation, the requirements for their operation, but that those real existential crises come from much more profound, much more widespread and systemic aspects of our social worlds. There our political economies, our very unjust distributions of resources, and both between the minority and majority worlds, and within even the worlds like North America, and so there are no technological solutions to those problems, and unless we really understand those problems in their social, political, economic bases, we're not going to make any progress in addressing them. And I think in that respect, the enormous visibility of the technologies and techniques that sort of get collected under the flag of AI is a huge and very, very worrying distraction from the kinds of analyses of the problems of the world and the real existential crises in the world that we need, both the root causes of those problems and the complex socio-technical solutions that we need to develop.
Thank you. Are we worried about the right things, and are we hopeful about the right things?
Yeah, so I guess I've addressed a little bit the question of, are we worried about the right things? I'm also really inspired by the tech worker coalitions, people working inside tech, inside big tech, who are starting to organize and speak out and mobilize and join an alliance with others working around policing, border control, militarism, and so forth. So those coalitions that are both working to address what I think are some of the real problems, and also out of those same coalitions, we get direction for what much more community-based computing, much more decentralized computing, much more computing that's much more oriented towards the everyday lives and problems that most people face. They're, I think, really pointing the way forward to how it could be otherwise, what other kinds of computing we might have, and what kinds of social and political and economic arrangements would be required for those approaches to flourish.
Thank you. Some experts think that today's chatbots have strong limitations and that we need to explore alternative approaches to AI. Why?
So there is a critique about contemporary chatbots, large language model-based chatbots, that is focused on the limits of statistical prediction and data-driven approaches in the absence of any kind of logical, rule-based, knowledge-based systems. And so there's a call to create new kind of hybrid approaches that bring back aspects of symbolic AI. I personally think that's a kind of tacking back and forth that may solve some practical problems, but doesn't really address that problem that I started with, which is the limits of these computational systems overall, the limits of the fact that they have no understanding, really. They have no knowledge. They have no understanding of the worlds that out of which human intelligence comes, and within which it gets enacted. And so the limits, from my point of view, are the ways in which these systems are contained within the representational possibilities that either data or symbolic logic offer. And they can then, within that closed world, do further do further analysis, do further inferencing, and so forth. But it still doesn't really connect back, draw from, or connect back with the kinds of open worlds that are what really make human intelligence possible.
Thank you. If you could create your own chatbot, what would it be like, or what would it do?
I guess the aspect of chatbots that I find most appealing are their humor, the humor that we bring to and find in them. And I think that there are some lovely, very inventive possibilities that have already been, demonstrated for that kind of playing around. And in a way, they offer a kind of disclosing agent for exactly the sort of points of connection and of difference between us and our machines that my argument has been based on. And so I think there, as kind of exploratory ways of exploring those differences, they can be both instructive and also very entertaining, both for the moments of where it works, in the sense that we can find meaning in what is returned by a chatbot, and then also, of course, in the growing number of extremely entertaining and funny ways in which they break down. So I think my response to chatbots would be very different if they were represented as another genre, in a way, in writing and creative practice, rather than a world transforming development, or something that represents the advent of artificial general intelligence, or the much larger claims that are made about them.
Many commentators see the future of chatbots and AI as part of a dire power struggle between China and the United States. What do you think of this?
The United States, our international relations at the moment are based on an idea of military supremacy. And in order to keep that going, I think basically interested actors need to find what's called a near peer competitor. And China is the best candidate for that. And I'm not saying that there certainly is grounds for criticism and concern about the Chinese government. But I think the representation of China as an imminent threat, at the moment, its primary purpose is to fuel an arms race, to justify enormous investments on the part of the U.S. government and Department of Defense in new technology, and specifically in AI. And so I think it's the threat from China is greatly overrepresented. And of course, arms races are self-fulfilling, in the sense that if the United States constitutes China as a threat, and begins a project of deterrence, basically, by building up its arsenal of AI-based weapon systems, then China may very well respond. And that's how we get into escalating arms races that we've had repeatedly throughout the last century and this century. So I think we really need to dial that rhetoric back and take a much more studied approach to thinking about the points where we know there are enormous intersections between the interests of the U.S. and China, and really look very skeptically at the claims for China's the imminence of the threat that we face from China, and the idea that necessitates an enormous buildup, new buildup of weapon systems, and particularly AI-based weapon systems.
Thank you. Um, so there seem to be many issues about trust surrounding chatbots, from the explainability of their operation to producing falsehoods and dangerous suggestions to bias and to the organizations that make and use them. So how important are these issues of trust to the future of chatbots and AI technology?
Yeah, well, I think there are two ways of thinking about trust. One is the idea that we start from the premise that we should trust these systems, and that the problem is that we as users have a kind of irrational fear of them, or we have certain prejudices or anxieties about them that need to be assuaged. We need to be reassured. The other way of thinking about trust is that it's a well founded recognition that the interests of those who are invested in chatbots and other AI based systems may not be the interests of the majority of us as a public. And so the kind of mistrust that I think is, the question is, who are we trusting, or who are we mistrusting? Are we trusting or mistrusting the chatbot, or are we trusting or mistrusting the incredible networks of humans that are the basis for these systems? Again, the provenance of the data, the vested interests behind them, the possibility, once we get to systems of such scale and complexity, of understanding how they work. So there are all sorts of good grounds, I think, for mistrust. And addressing that is not just a matter of reassurance, it's a matter of really hard thinking about uh, about what it is that makes these systems either trustworthy or not. So I think trust is an important problem, and I think that the kind of trust that has to do with being able to count on the vetting, curation, the care, the accountability that goes into developing these systems is really crucial, and that's what we have to insist on if we're talking about trustworthy systems.
Thank you. Um, so creating chatbots and other AI systems uses a huge amount of energy and natural resources. Um, is AI environmentally sustainable?
I think this is a really serious question, and my position, based on what I understand about the resource requirements of these systems, is that we have not done a serious reckoning of the costs and benefits. There are obviously enormous returns on investment for a small number of people from these systems, and that has basically pushed all of the considerations of their costs in energy, natural resource extraction, also human labor, much of which we know is very precarious, very exploited labor. Those costs are always marginalized by the proponents of AI, and I think we have to bring them into the center. And we also have to think about the opportunity, the lost opportunity costs. Where else could resources be? Um, if we're concerned about the climate crisis, for example, we can build more AI systems to sense and diagnose the causes of the climate crisis. But in a way, I think we have the knowledge that we need about the causes of the climate crisis. What we need is action to address it. And that's not going to come from AI based systems. And in fact, many of the resources that are going into the development of these systems could be better deployed on radically different kinds of social and socio-technical experiments in sustainability, sustainability in terms of energy, sustainability in terms of food security, and so forth. So we dwell in a very, very technocentric world in the United States, particularly, and there are actors who have a very strong vested interest in maintaining the idea of techno-solutionism. And we need to push back on that very hard, I think, and be open to much more radically differently organized approaches to addressing the problems of inequality, the problems of insecurity that many people in the United States face, and certainly people around the world.
Thank you. So some experts say that today's chatbots are stochastic parrots that give the appearance of understanding things, while other experts say they're emergent learners that actually do understand things about the world. Which is it from your perspective?
I'm definitely in the stochastic parrot camp when it comes to large language models. I don't think it just as I think it's pretty clear that large language models don't understand anything. I mean, it's interesting because natural language, we can think about natural language understanding, which is, of course, a long-standing subfield of computer science, or we can think about natural language processing. And I think processing is the more apt term. The only understanding that's present in large language models is the understanding that we bring to them, as readers, that we bring to them as people engaged with the textual or visual output that they produce. And so the understanding is all on the human side. And insofar as these systems operate, again, within closed worlds that are made up of computable tokens, basically, but computable tokens that have no reference, no connections, not only to knowledge bases, but more importantly, to the worlds that knowledge bases render. In the absence of those actual relations with the worlds of lived experience, of sociality, there can be no understanding. And so again, these systems are deeply integrated with our ongoing our resources for understanding the world, just as books and other kinds of media are. But they themselves have no understanding at all, and I don't see any evidence that is changing in any way through the scaling up of data-driven systems.
Thank you. So I've heard the quip where you hear AI look for the people. Is that true of today's chatbots, and how so?
Yeah, I think that's a very good instruction. And because the people are systematically erased in discourses about AI, and they're absolutely integral and essential. So we're talking about a range of different people here. We're talking about those who have a vested interest in these systems, venture capitalists, owners of those who are profiting, big tech. And then we have all of the people involved in the sourcing of data, the curation of data to the degree that it happens. Of course, the writing the code, developing systems, but also very importantly, as we know, very large numbers of people working in the kind of sweatshops of content moderation, of labeling, data labeling, and so forth. And so the effects of meaningfulness, of understanding, and we could say the same thing about large language models, about language itself, that the vast amounts of text that are the basis for these models they have been historically generated by us. We're now getting into a situation where these models are recursively producing more text, and we can see that makes the closed world that I'm concerned about even more closed, and also makes it more and more obscure to actually understand the provenance of where things come from, right? So the stochastic parrots now are parroting themselves, and that represents, a really big concern. So in all of these cases, we need to roll back the rhetoric and actually see where the labors and the meaning and understanding as it's produced by us by us humans, to be able to do the kind of forensics of how that happens, and recover the human practice that is really what these systems are all about.
What are the copyright or other intellectual property concerns around chatbots and generative AI?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, these systems are obviously enormous plagiarism machines. So in a way, we're entering a situation where plagiarism is the default, and so we have to be increasingly aware of questions of provenance and authorship, and I think it's very encouraging to see artists and writers and other creative practitioners again starting to organize to insist on their rights to not have the things that they produce somehow then become available for reuse in whatever ways benefit primarily the interests of big tech. So issues of copyright and authorship, I think, are taking on a whole new and really vitally important life, and I hope that those whose labor really is reflected in the production of the material that then circulates, and is vulnerable to being appropriated, that those people insist that their creative labor is acknowledged, and they may decide to give those rights up. That's fine, but that needs to be their decision.
Right. Can we regulate chatbots, and if so, how?
Well, we're obviously in the throes of enormous amounts of discussion about the question of how to regulate uh, AI systems more broadly, and chatbots more specifically. And I think that, again, the crucial thing is that we both recognize some of the generic issues around these technologies, like copyright, for example, and we also recognize that a lot of the potential harms are application specific. So facial recognition is a good example, because facial recognition is a general technology, but it's a general technology that has proven itself to be so problematic, available for application in so many domains where it can be misused, where the limits of facial recognition in terms of its reliance on profiling, its reliance on enrolling people in data sets, databases, and or stereotypically profiling people, is just so clearly harmful. So there have been moves to ban the use of facial recognition, at least by police, by border control, and so forth. So I think that's a good example of a general capability that we can see has clearly harmful applications. There are others, like automated decision support, where there may be very benign applications, but there are also clearly harmful applications if we're talking about predictive policing, or we're talking about credit rating or employment and so forth. So we're starting to see push for regulation in those kinds of application areas. And I think that's really important and makes a lot more sense. Thinking about facial recognition, automated decision support, and so forth are good ways in. But then we really need to start looking at the domains of application, and what kind of rights need to be ensured for people who feel the consequences, the effects of the operations of those systems. And we see over and over that brings us back to more longstanding social problems around discrimination. So this is an occasion for further attention to the many modes of discrimination for which these systems are effectively amplifiers. And we have to address those things together.
Okay. What are the business models for chatbots?
An obvious and concerning business model would be the long-standing project of automation, of translating labor costs into capital investment, of taking jobs which which we consider to be skilled in such a way that they require good compensation, and attempting to de-skill those jobs so that they then can be argued to require less compensation. And one of the consequences of that is not only that the quality of people's jobs declines, but and that there's more and more outsourcing to more and more forms of precarious labor, but also that the kinds of re-engineering that are required in order to turn jobs, to make work automatable, further standardizes and reduces the kind of discretion, the kind of creativity that would otherwise inform the work of being a paralegal, for example, and doing the kinds of analyses that people in those positions do. And while, of course, there are routine aspects of every kind of work where people welcome the incorporation of software in ways that reduce the tedious parts. If that's being done with a primary interest in lowering labor costs, then it has detrimental effects on labor markets, and it has detrimental effects on all of those who rely on the products of that labor, because the work has to be, again, simplified, standardized, and a lot of the quality of that is actually involved in the human performance of those jobs is suppressed, basically.
Thank you. So I guess we kind of covered that one. Well, chatbots evoke a lot of emotions, from great hope to grave fear. Why?
The chatbots are part of a wider lure, the lure of anthropomorphism. And, there aren't many things that I will say we're hardwired for, because I'm a great believer in the interactional character and sort of foundations of our intelligence. But I would say we are hardwired to anthropomorphize. If something moves, we animate it, we ascribe it with life. And so that's a tremendously powerful inclination, and chatbots exploit that, of course. And so, on the dark side, I think that chatbots, the kind of appeal, the investment, is part of a frame that is tied to the idea that some people, some beings in the world should serve others. So it's a mentality of inequality, of hierarchy, and the dream that machines are going to become fully conversational, fully interactive, is tied up with a dream that they are going to then serve us. They are going to become. We can all be have servants. We can all have enslaved others, and we don't have to feel guilty about it because they're machines, right? So there's a lot of the same kind of ideology that has been with us since in different forms, but with those of us in the West, starting with automation during the Industrial Revolution, the idea and that we can create um, machines in the image of the lesser um, the lesser human, but that they can become sufficiently competent, like the perfect butler, the perfect maid, so that they know us, they can anticipate our desires, and they can provide for us, and we can all basically, I think of this as a kind of upstairs downstairs. We can all live upstairs, and of course, this is a complete illusion because we know that the political economies, as we were saying earlier, that support these technologies involve the creation and the perpetuation of enormous inequality, precarious labor, and so forth. But for those, I think, who find the idea of intelligent machines so compelling, this idea that machines are going to become our perfect servants, I think, is a really, really key and core part of that idea. And I think chatbots are consistent with that history.
Yeah, what is the role of science fiction and popular culture in that?
The traffic between um, computing and science fiction is thick and heavy, and there's a lot to learn by looking at what kinds of imaginaries inform this science fiction that inspires technology development, and what are the politics really of those fantasies. And I think this politics of service are absolutely, may I say, ubiquitous to those what we call socio-technical imaginaries, and it's a place where we get again, it's disclosing of values, of understandings of the world, of how the world is, of how the world should be, and we all have different, either enthusiastic or critical relations to the worlds that are depicted in our favorite science fiction. And science fiction, of course, feminist science fiction, is working to come up with quite radically different visions of what alternative worlds could look like. So it's a place to express that range of possibilities.
Um, how might chatbots change programming and computer science?
Well, we're seeing that uh, CodePilot and other computational assistants for coding are already having a huge effect, and it seems logical that, if we think about the kind of automation projects that we see in other areas of labor, then code writing, of course, is arguably ready made for that. I think so. So there are clearly huge practical applications. I imagine that people who really do creative code writing might have some of the same feelings that people who do other kinds of work, journalists, other kinds of creative practitioners, they may have some of the same feelings about the prospects of increasing automation of code writing, because again, the way it works is always to further standardize, create more boilerplate, more templates, more, and things you obviously gain in various kinds of efficiencies by doing that, but obviously things are also lost. And I suspect there will be a lot of uptake and a lot of people learning to code, people learning into new languages. They're gonna find these assistants, coding assistants, incredibly useful. Um, and there will also be probably some sites of struggle over some of the downsides and the costs of the further automation of code writing as a profession.
Thank you. Um, how might chatbots affect education?
I think in education, as in other domains, um, there could be really great opportunities for teaching critical literacy through the use of chatbots. And of course, there's a huge concern among those who are teaching with longstanding problems of plagiarism, which can be greatly exacerbated by the availability of these tools. And so probably now there are going to be whole new diagnostics for uh, to try to see how things are, what the evidence is that something was written with a chatbot. So I think there could be both huge creative possibilities as part of a kind of critical technical literacy, and also huge headaches for people who are teaching and who are really committed to the idea that writing, say, writing an essay, is not just about producing the end product. It is about the process of learning to write. And writing, as most people who write know, it's you have a love-hate relationship to it, right? It's painful, it has its bad days, its good days, but that process of of really wrestling with a set of ideas, with figuring out what your argument is going to be, what's going to be figure, what's going to be ground, and kind of creating something that really works, that really makes sense, that has coherence. That is a form of labor. So much happens during the course of that process, and none of that is present in chatbot generated text. So I guess if you're a student who actually wants to learn, then you're going to be appropriately skeptical about the value of chatbots. And if you're a student who's just going through the motions and needs to come out at the end with a credential, the temptation is going to be enormous. And that says much more about basic questions about how we collectively approach learning as a society than it does about the technology, actually.
Yeah. Um, so how will chatbots affect science, technology, and medicine more broadly?
Well, I guess my answer is, similar in the sense that I think in all domains, um, I don't imagine chatbots getting huge amounts of traction in sciences tech. I can see certain applications, but for the most part, people working in science, technology, medicine are, again, other than maybe some useful summarization, abstracting from very well curated data sets could be useful. Um, but for the most part, I think people need to be engaged in the processes out of which knowledge is co-produced with other people. And chatbots are a very superficial kind of intervention in that process.
All right. So our final question: how important are critical voices to the development of chatbots and artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, you probably won't be surprised to hear that I think critical voices are absolutely essential here. I'm really grateful for the voices that have come out of big tech. Uh, People we know, Timnit Gebru, and the people working with Dare and the people working in AI Now, which is a wonderful kind of AI think tank that has been doing critical work, really important critical work for some years now. Um, I'm really heartened by the number of young people in academia, in tech, who are writing within their communities, conferences like FACT, and really developing what Phil Agri, a wonderful MIT AI scholar, named a critical technical practice. And that to me is the most heartening thing that's happening. I think if we have critical technical practitioners in the sense that of people who really see it as integral to their jobs and to their what it is that they're contributing and to what they find interesting actually and exciting, who really see questioning the kind of unexamined assumptions that are built into the discipline of computer science, that are built into the basic starting premises of AI, where the blind spots are, and are interested in getting into coalition with people outside of academia, outside of tech, who are directly affected by these technologies, whether it's people working in immigration, people working with labor. Those coalitions are really exciting. And what the critical technical practitioners inside companies, inside academia bring is absolutely invaluable. And among those technical practitioners who I know, it's tremendously enriching to their technical work to be thinking about these problems. So that's really, to me, one of the most exciting things that's happening, and gives me the most hope that there could really be quite radical rethinking of what the field of computer science is for, who it's for, who are the allies, who are those outside of the discipline, who can be really, really generative collaborators and partners in the work. That is, there's a lot of promise there, but it does imply pretty radical transformations in the arrangements within which technology gets created.
Yes, thank you. So this is maybe a timely or topical question, but what has been your take on this whole OpenAI stuff going on in the last couple of weeks?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that the shall we say developments in OpenAI, and I haven't followed them in all of their gory detail, I will say, but my sense is that it's part of what's going on. At least is a kind of um, revelation of some inbuilt contradictions between the idea of research as a kind of public good on the one hand, and the realities of the kinds of investments, capital investments, and business models that are funding. And that, as we were saying, because of the data and compute requirements, the need for enormous amounts of funding in order to build these systems, that there's a kind of contradiction built in there between the ideology of openness and the ideology of basic research on the one hand, and the realities of return on investment on the other, and productization and so forth. And that part of what we're seeing is a manifestation of that contradiction.